where we are going to address probably one of the most challenging and difficult topics that the Open Series has looked at recently, and that is emerging and disruptive technologies in the Middle East and Africa.
The world is so interconnected, so if anywhere in the world becomes a cybersecurity hub for criminals or state actors, etc., it can be used as a vector.
The integrity, not only of the Western narrative, but information and facts, is being harmed.
The more digital we become, the more problems we're going to have to think about. And that's why we need to think in a smart way. We need to focus on developing a framework.
I think the one thing we have learned out of COVID, for sure, has been if you're not connected, you've got a problem.
Good morning and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of my boss, the Supreme Allied Commander, Transformation General NATO, welcome to today's webinar, where we are going to address probably one of the most challenging and difficult topics that the Open Series has looked at recently, and that is emerging and disruptive technologies in the Middle East and Africa. And I say that because we just here at ACT wrote the military advice to the international staff on our recommendations regarding emerging and disruptive technologies. And what's so challenging is that most of these technologies are being developed and are available commercially. And again, in the organizations we're concerned with in the Middle East and Africa, they are not necessarily as constrained by ethical, legal, and moral standards that the rest of the Western nations are constrained by. So I think today's discussion will be robust and perhaps at times uncomfortable.
The role of cybersecurity, disinformation, manipulation of data, all as part of a side effect of the massive explosion in electronic connectivity that has occurred across the Middle East and Africa in the last 20 years or so. Although it is very patchy depending on which part of that extraordinarily large and diverse region you may happen to find yourself.
During the last decade, mainly the Middle East and North Africa have been described as an area of growing instability with transnational and multinational security challenges. But looking quite closer and with a different approach, the security challenges actually are global and requires new level of shared awareness, flexibility, cross-organizational cooperation, and strengthened crisis response capability and resilience. In 2016, NATO has committed itself to better understand the Middle East and North Africa and common challenges as disrupting technologies, and to assess their applicability in the military domain with the aim to implement them through innovative solutions.
So in Morocco, it's an extremely young population. Still, more than a quarter of the population of this youth are unemployed. And this is even before the crisis, even before the pandemic. During the pandemic, the situation is probably much worse. There is also huge socioeconomic inequalities. So there are people who live well, but there are a lot of people who are on the poverty, and there is this huge resentment. And this creates considerable.
But there are lots of positives, and many of these positives about what technology can offer us. Next, please. We have a young population. We're more energetic than other parts of the world simply by dint of our age. As the rest of the world is getting older, we have a population whose average age is around 20. Next, please. And as our birth rates come down, hopefully, and as this youthful body of people in our societies are translated into job seekers and workers, you'll see dependency ratios fall considerably in Africa, while they increase in the rest of the world because of an increase in the number proportionately of older people. Next, please. Our urban population rate is increasing steadily. As I've said, that has advantages in terms of the delivery of services and agglomeration of people to work in meaningful economic ways. Next, please. Our access to housing has been very low, in part because of the access to housing loans, and the revolution in banking across Africa is quite quickly changing this picture. Next, please. And similarly, most of Africa remains powerless in terms of access to electricity. Again, the development of microgrids and other payment methods for national grids is fast changing this and offers all sorts of previously unavailable avenues. Next, please. Similarly, the same can be said for potable water. All of this facilitated to a great extent by commercial investment. Next, please. Cost of logistics in Africa remains very high. One of the reasons for this is not tariffs so much as simply the difficulties of crossing borders, and the digitization of cargo manifests and port clearance procedures is certainly helping, and East Africa is a great case study in this regard. Next, please. And of course, we've already discussed this, but internet and telephony penetration has transformed Africa from being the cut-off continent in the mid-1990s to really being a continent that is connected with itself more than anything else. People don't have to literally travel days across territories to go and speak to someone. You can pick up your mobile phone. Next, please. And this has improved particularly financial institution penetration. Indeed, Africa has been the market leader.
I mean, the stigma that Arab youth are all having this kind of weapon and trying to attack is not true. A lot of youth in Morocco or North Africa, they want a job, they want economic opportunities, they want to start a business, they're going to get there. They just want to have a decent life. If you give them a decent life, they're not interested in crime or weapon. And I think if they can get this opportunity, and I think it's very important. And so one way, this is not the only way, but one way is to kind of show them this opportunity. Again, coming back to this thing that they're not aware of opportunities, they're not aware of good cases. So one simple idea was just to showcase successful people who maybe went from a poor background and were able to succeed. Showcase the positive energy. There's a lot of negative energy in Morocco. Lots of youth, they think that even if they work, they'll never succeed. So just show them some positive energy. Give them information about opportunities. Again, there's a lot, like data is not shared in Morocco. Even within the same administration, they will not share data. And nothing they can do about it. Its culture is very difficult to change, but technology is actually much easier to change. So there's a lot of old data that's out there on the internet, on social media, on websites. AI can turn this data into economic intelligence, social intelligence, help interventions, show them the economic opportunities, bring the investors, and give them jobs. I think that's what the North African youth wants. I mean, the Arab Spring, which was this huge movement, I mean, it happened, it started because a Tunisian guy did lose his jobs. So jobs are really this super critical issue in Morocco and North Africa.
And if you were to do a SWOT analysis on Africa, as I've said, we're poor, there's lots of upside because we're poor, close to Europe, close to the Middle East. We have a favorable long-term democratic trajectory. We're increasingly connected with the rest of the world. We talk the same language as much of the richer countries in the world, but we're poor. There's very opaque systems of governance. There's boom and bust economic cycles. is an elite and often authoritarian political economy. We don't add much value to the things that we trade, and our infrastructure and skills base is poor. The opportunities are the rest of the world's getting old. We are congregating in urban areas to a much greater extent than hitherto, and there's pretty low growth elsewhere. And there's still demand for commodities. And then finally, I would say that the big threats are if we don't respond to urbanization, we don't respond to demographic pressures, that democracy and governance stalls, government is seen to be unresponsive to this, climate change is a wild card, and that Europe potentially shuts its doors to Africa and doesn't allow that gentle let off of steam in the form of migrants and reverse flow and remittances.
When you look at the last maybe 5 or 7 years, you will see maybe 3 things happening. Number one, you see cyber attacks are more global, they are more mobile, they are higher cost, and more recently they are becoming more political, which means they are affecting the social fabric of our political and social systems. Cyber attacks, they cost about roughly, in one estimate, $17 million per week. This number has doubled exponentially compared to a previous year. It is expected that the higher cost will reach a cost of more than $2 trillion, primarily in terms of recovering assets, but more importantly in identity theft and other social and psychological impact and effect that is very difficult to quantify.
I know that NATO is also already collaborating with Moroccans. I mean, cybercrime in Morocco is, if there's a problem in cybersecurity in Morocco or in Africa, it's a problem in the world, because a lot of hackers, they go through infected computers and they use these infected computers to infect others. So this is, I mean, the world is so interconnected. So if anywhere in the world becomes a cybersecurity hub for criminals or state actors, etc., it can be used as a vector. So it's very important for the NATO, I think, to protect itself against those. And of course, I mean, I know that this employment issue and this unemployment is probably not on the top of the NATO, but I like to bring it up. Again, if there is a lot of social unrest, a lot of unemployment, a lot of people want to migrate abroad, and that creates tensions on the receiving countries if they're starting to receive a lot of illegal immigrants. So that's the threat I see.
Just remember a few cases, few practical cases, how Estonia in 2007 was almost completely locked down in one of the first very eye-opening events related to a cyber attack. How Daesh, ISIS, as normally as common called, is still capable to foster its malign narrative through an effective use of social media, fake news, disinformation, and how in September 2019, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia oil pumping station located in Abqaiq, the Aramco station, was almost massively destroyed by a massive attack executed by a wing of unmanned aerial system, about 25 drones and ballistic missiles, in accordance with the media.
So allow me just to start by saying that this information should not be considered as a technical issue, but rather a strategic challenge. This information is a tool that is designed to infiltrate and further strategic objectives on both public and decision-making levels. It is definitely not a standalone tool, but part of an arsenal designed to target states and businesses without triggering, and I think this is important, without triggering aggressive reaction, without passing that threshold of what is considered to be aggressive action. It makes a perfect tool for adversaries due to plausible deniability and remote deployment.
The greatest challenge to at least African countries from cyber comes in the form of election tampering, and essentially being able to work for the most part for incumbents to be able to tamper, fiddle, gerrymander, tinker, pick your verb, with the election processes and outcomes in favor of the incumbent.
In a region like the Middle East, disinformation campaign not only can impact violence and erode the social cohesion, as I said, but also lead to major and deep conflicts between states.
Very briefly, I wanted to share with you, Dave, and with your audience, what I call in my writing the human-centric approach. This is something that I gathered from a variety of sources, and when you read it, when you hear it, it's very, very sobering. You will see, for instance, that 85% of cyber attacks could be unsuccessful if IT staff has taken basic steps. 51% of worst UK data breaches, this is specifically to the UK, are caused or were caused by staff error or misuse. How would you design a national strategy framework? What would be the component of a typical framework for a national strategy, cybersecurity strategy? Well, you would want, first of all, you start from the top. And when you start from the top, you're talking specifically about the vision. There is how you can define the vision, how you can define the objectives, and how you can define the priorities for this cybersecurity national strategy. Then you get into the core, and in the core, you need, first of all, to have an agency. Most of the time, it's a national agency that allows for the sharing of data and information, and the sharing of data and information allows you to be able to understand the threat and to trace the threat. You need also to set up a national contingency plan, and in the national contingency plan is what-if scenario. And then that system that you create also has to be open to the world, meaning open to other parties, open to third parties, in order to create what we call interoperability. In other words, that system has to talk and has to figure out other systems as well. You need also to have in this national framework also a focus on innovation and R&D. Research and development is critical to developing information technology, generally speaking, and AI, artificial intelligence, but more importantly, how you can protect your assets and how you can protect your infrastructure. Of course, this framework will not be successful if it stays at the expert or at the technical level. You have to make sure and you have to make an effort to push this framework and this information down to the society so people know what it means and how they can protect themselves, whether we're talking about educational institutions around campuses, because that's where you have a lot of computers and you have a lot of networking and you have a lot of connections, or cyber coffee shops, or companies, or institutions or employees. It is a must to have this type of information and this type of awareness campaign awareness.
I understand that you'll need a national strategy, but what is the status of those kinds of strategies in Africa and the Middle East? Are countries able to do this strategic planning themselves, or do they need to have stronger institutions first?
Well, I think it's one of those questions that you have to address while you are building the different governance institutions. The challenge for African countries, most of African countries, is that this is something that you cannot deprioritize. It is as important as other institutions. And yes, in a lot of countries, there is a lack of technical expertise. There is a lack of technical staff. But there are also a lot of opportunities within these universities, around campuses and around the private sector. And if these governments are open and they have a clear strategy on how to target skills and talent and experts around campuses and integrate them into the fabric of the national strategy, I am sure you will end up with a very important and a good framework.
I mean, Ali's question is, to what extent does emerging and disruptive tech in the Middle East and North Africa region, or actually Middle East and Africa, how could we consider that to be a threat to NATO? And what can NATO provide or offer to countries in those regions in practical terms?
We are seeing this information that are backing actors who might be hostile towards NATO, or who might consider NATO as an enemy. Not only that, but we can also see these disruptive and destructive narratives basically promoting NATO not only as an enemy and a force of malign influence, but also as a force of destabilization of a country, in the sense that we need to fight this new power coming into the region. What can NATO do? I think NATO can do a lot, but NATO must take into consideration the different contexts of countries in the region, in the Middle East and North Africa region. Because if NATO were to integrate to support the state in fighting disinformation and these, or at least limit and mitigate the effects of these destructive tools, they need to work within the mechanisms that are already applied in each country. So I don't think NATO can have a system that could be integrated across the region as a whole, but it could have different mechanisms and different cooperation points and programs to each and every country. So I don't think what NATO can do, there's one answer to that, but there are many.